Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of County Commissioners policy session. Today we are discussing the proposed surface transportation funding solutions. And I renamed it surface transportation. I inserted that in the title, not to be confused with any other item the county might be putting forward. I thought it was more descriptive, so you guys decide if you want to use that term or not. Gary.
Thank you, Chair Smith. So all commissioners are present, and yes, we're talking about surface transportation funding for the highway system and county values on proposed solutions. This was an initial request of Commissioner Savas, and the board agreed to have this 2-hour session today. We have staff from Public and Government Affairs and Transportation and Development to start with the presentation and then have a full discussion. So we have Trent Wilson, Chris Lyons from Public and Government Affairs, Jamie Stasny from Transportation and Development, and Abe Molen from Health, Housing, and Human Services. So whoever's starting, please go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Nice to see you.
Wait,
Before
Chris.
you start, Commissioner Savas has his hand raised.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, Chair, I just want to make a comment about the word surface transportation. So in certain parts of the country, surface transportation or surface streets is considered the local roads, and interstates are excluded from that in comment. So in California, for example.
Yeah, but this isn't California, so we need to come up with a better term. I really appreciate you saying that, because as I read through the document, transit was mentioned in this document. But from my understanding, we're concerned about the paving and expansion of our interstate and roads, Paul. That's why I threw it in. So if you want to come up with another term, I would be more than happy to entertain that.
Yeah, okay, great. We'll talk about that another time. Thank you.
Yeah, so staff can be working on that too. Thank you. Because the original title was Proposed Funding Solutions, but it doesn't say what it is. It could be human services, it could be housing, it could be anything. So, but I want a more descriptive term than just transportation too, because it's all encompassing. Thank you. Go ahead, Gary.
All right, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners. So this is, as we've titled it, a policy session focused on transportation funding for the interstate highway system. I'm Chris Lyons with PGA. Pleased to present this to you today. We'll be also, as part of this presentation, sharing a draft policy approach for the board's consideration on this issue. So as you know, this topic is very timely, as the Oregon legislature is currently considering some of these funding proposals during this legislative session. So there's very much a need for us to begin to develop a policy foundation for the county for navigating all of these discussions that are underway. After we lay out all the background on the transportation funding, we'll pause at various points during the presentation to open the floor for any questions you might have, because there is a lot of information and it's pretty complex. So as Gary mentioned, we have Trent Wilson from PGA, Jamie Stasny from DTD, and Abe Molen with us virtually from H3S, and I'm going to turn it over to Jamie first to kick us off.
Great, thank you, Chris. And if you can allow Abe to screen share, we're ready for the presentation.
Abe is not on yet.
Sorry, just one second. He says he's waiting to be allowed in.
I just sent him a link. I'm not sure if he's in the correct Zoom room.
Who are we waiting for?
Abe Molen, one of the staff members who's online.
Can you text him, please? And I'm going to go ahead and get started. I don't think we need the slideshow for the first pieces, so I'll go ahead and get us started off. So good morning, Chair Smith and Commissioners. I'm Jamie Stasny with DTD, and today we're planning to take you through the policy session that you've requested. We're going to have 4 distinct sections, which we will, as Chris said, pause after each one and ask for questions. The first is the history of transportation funding. Then we're going to move into the future of transportation funding, the equity approach, and then the Clackamas County values and outcomes for interstate highway funding. So those are the 4 sections. Okay, so we're here today to talk about funding for major capital projects on the interstate system. And we have a problem. Our problem is that the Interstate 205 widening and seismic improvement project and other major infrastructure projects in the region have reached a critical policy dilemma. Namely, how will the state and the Oregon Department of Transportation fund bottleneck projects in the Portland region? So our transportation system that we have today is a product of a variety of stakeholders that play different roles in guiding funding policy. Those are federal, state, regional, and local. They all have different roles. The process that we have has created the transportation system that we have today, which supports the livelihood of residents, but also has historically harmed communities of color and low-income communities. It's created inequities in access and increased health disparities. This dates back to the 1950s, where intentional planning, policy, and funding decisions for the interstate system excluded low-income groups and communities of color, predominantly Black communities, and prioritized wealthy white neighborhoods. As we will discuss more later, this is why things are being done in a different way now. So there are three primary issues that are facing highway funding today. First, unlike many taxes like income and sales tax that rise along with prices, inflation erodes most transportation funding sources. The three main funding sources are the gas tax, DMV fees, and weight mile taxes on heavy trucks. All of these are flat rates that don't grow as prices go up. So they're dependent on the legislature increasing them to raise more money. Fuel efficiency growth has rendered the fuels tax unsustainable over the long term. This is due both to electric vehicles, but also because even internal combustion engines are getting more efficient. This is critical because the fuels tax is the largest source of state and federal transportation funding. And the third issue is that federal funding has been flat since 1993. ODOT can no longer rely on the feds as a major partner in preserving and improving the transportation system, though perhaps that will change. So as I said, the gas tax is the workhorse of ODOT's transportation funding. It makes up the vast majority of the funding that's flowing into the Federal Highway Trust Fund and is about 40% of the funding flowing into the State Highway Fund. So fuel efficiency has been increasing for more than a decade and will be increasing into the future, both as we see more electric vehicles on the road and as gas-powered vehicles become more efficient. And we do expect to see more electric vehicles on the road. Big changes are in sight for manufacturers like General Motors, who recently pledged they would stop making gasoline-powered passenger vehicles by 2035. California also has an executive order that all passenger vehicles sold in the state must be zero emission by 2035. As a result of increasing fuel efficiency, the sustainability of the fuels tax will be compromised. Although hybrid and electric vehicles represent an increasing share of Oregon's light-duty vehicles, they're not the only cause. For example, a 2004 Subaru Outback had a highway mile per gallon rating of 25 miles per gallon. The same model in 2020 has a rating of 33 miles per gallon. That's a 32% increase. Over time, the share of vehicles that get over 30 miles per gallon is going to grow significantly as existing vehicles are replaced with more fuel-efficient vehicles. So due to that increasing mile per gallon, cumulative effect over 17 years is about $1.1 billion. Bottom line is that the gas tax is not a reliable source of funding. ODOT's been on a revenue growth trend for several years thanks to the legislature's tax and fee increases in HB 2017. They've already had 2 gas tax increases and have 2 more coming in 22 and 24. The COVID recession took a big chunk out of their revenue, about $225 million this year and last year, about a 7% reduction. Once the HB 2017 revenue increases are fully implemented, ODOT's revenue is going to go flat, or could decline after you adjust for inflation. Since 2009, federal highway funding to Oregon has been flat. The amount ODOT received in 21 is almost exactly the same as what they received in 2009. When adjusted for inflation, they're down over $100 million over this time period. This is going to affect capital projects as well as operations and maintenance. So ODOT looked at total state and federal highway funds and adjusted them for inflation. Their analysis showed that state and federal highway funding has been growing in recent years. However, it will peak this year and start declining in inflation-adjusted terms after that. Of course, a federal infrastructure bill or a long-term reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act could change that. as could additional investments by the Oregon legislature. Oregon is a state that focuses on preserving the system and making it safe first, and only after that putting money into enhancing the system. Because there isn't enough money to keep the system from deteriorating, the funding for improving the transportation system in the STIP, or State Transportation Improvement Program, is significantly constrained. In the 24 to 27 STIP, the enhanced highway category that funds operational improvements and additional capacity is one of the smallest categories, with just $175 million. This is a reduction of nearly 75% from the 21 to 24 STIP, when a large number of projects were included from HB 2017. Finally, the criteria and priorities for transportation funding are changing. With the focus on climate action and mode shift, projects with new lanes or other capacity components are becoming more and more difficult to fund. So that is the end of the history of funding section of our presentation. Do you have any questions regarding this section?
Board, do you have any questions for the presenter? I see none. Would you like to continue?
Yes, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Trent Wilson to take you through the future of transportation funding.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think the key phrase here as we talk about this next section is the transition. We're in a transition season of what has been, and that's what Jamie was describing, and then what's going on now, which is my part here today. And so on this first slide, you see that we have several types of funding that are currently under consideration, especially for interstate systems, which is what we're prioritizing today. And so we see things like federal earmarks and programmatic funding, the road user fee, as well as tolling or congestion pricing. And so we can use those words interchangeably, but they also have distinct meanings, and we'll get into that a little bit more here in a little bit. The key takeaway here, though, is that federal earmarks, programmatic funding, and anything that comes out of Washington, D.C., that's competitive funding. It's not very predictable. And oftentimes here in the region, we have our own priorities, or we have mega projects or bigger projects that we are trying to position for. And it's not the best approach, but it just happens to be where the money is. So things like a road user fee or tolling, that creates predictable revenue, which is what we're trying to get back towards, as Jamie was describing, as the gas tax declines. Finding something that can replace that can be predictable, is a solution that might be beneficial to something like the interstate system, which doesn't have that presently. Next slide, please. So jumping into the earmarks, Board, you might remember 2 weeks ago on March 30th, you approved the county's earmark priorities, and that includes projects like supporting the I-205 Abernathy Bridge replacement and seismic repairs, as well as $10 million in safety improvements, specifically for Stafford Road and 65th and Ellickson, and as well as a set of city projects that were also submitted for that, and our own Bull Run Bridge and Willamette Falls Locks. Again, these are competitive dollars. They're not predictable revenue, and we'll do our best to chase them. We take every lead. We work with our federal lobbyists to pursue these funds, including for our interstate project for I-205. Now, ODOT submits for that, and we support ODOT in going after it. It's a project that's pivotal for Clackamas County. But again, it's competitive funding. We compete with the rest of the nation for funding like that. Moving into a road user fee, that creates something that could potentially replace a gas tax. When a gas tax was initially created, it was a pretty pure usage of I am driving, so I'm using gas, and if you tax my gas, you're taxing me as the driver. I'm putting this back into the road. So those funds go back into the road, and the road user fee, rather than doing it by gas mileage, would do it rather by how much miles you drive. And so this is a transition that we're seeing as cars become more efficient, as Jamie was describing. Here in Oregon, we have our own pilot project that's been going since 2013. It's called Origo. It has over 1,600 active members in it. But currently, in the state legislature, House Bill 2342 is seeking to make that more of a permanent project, again with the intention of supplementing and then maybe one day replacing the gas tax as electrification happens or as more fuel efficiency becomes more prevalent. So they expect, if the bill passes this year, that the Origo program would be up and running by 2027. So this is on the horizon, again, mentioning that this is a transition season of a project that's been in the works and then will be implemented and up and going here in 2027. Yes, Chair.
Yeah, Trent, you can register for Origo right now. If you have a vehicle over 40 miles per gallon, you can opt out of tiered. Is that participating now?
I think you can participate now regardless of the type of vehicle you have, and then the efficiency of your vehicle allows you to participate in different ways.
Okay, what do you mean when you say you can opt out of tiered registration fees if they join or go?
So think of it like, and let me look into this a little bit more, but I believe
Yeah,
it's kind
just
of.
bring
Yeah,
back
let me
the
to you.
information. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I find that interesting. We might want to explain that to the folks. Go ahead, thank you.
Yeah, let me bring that back to you, thanks. Another transition that we're seeing here is the Oregon State Legislature trying to find funding solutions for bigger projects that are of statewide significance, and that includes the work that they did in 2017 to create a state transportation package. This was a big funding package for a lot of transportation projects. It included many varieties and modes of transportation. What we're going to focus on today are two particular pieces of that puzzle, which are the three bottlenecks that were prioritized of statewide significance, as well as the direction from the state legislature to the Oregon Transportation Commission, which manages ODOT, the policy body for ODOT, to implement value pricing tolling. So those are the two things that House Bill 2017 did for the purposes of our conversation today. For those big bottleneck projects here in the region, there's Highway 217, which received full funding. There's the Rose Quarter project up in Portland, which received a dedicated revenue source that would be implemented as starting next year. Starting next year, it's called the Regional Penny, is what we often refer to it as. And then our very own highway, our Interstate 205 project between Stafford Road and Abernathy Bridge. So that was just given $13 million in planning funds with the great partnership with ODOT. ODOT has gone above and beyond to find additional planning dollars. That project's now at 90% design and should be shovel-ready by the end of the year. And of the three projects, 217 has its own funding, so it's moving along very well. But I-205 is a ready-to-build project without a dedicated revenue source for its construction. So it comes back to this conundrum of how do you fund these essential needs projects that are statewide significance? And in 2017, the legislature's solution was toll them. The ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, already has the authority to do traditional tolls. I need a new bridge, I drive over the bridge, I pay a quarter, a penny, a dollar, whatever they come up with. They already have the authority to do stuff like that. What House Bill 2017 did was direct ODOT to pursue a different type of tolling. It's called congestion pricing tolling. And as we get closer into the presentation, Jamie and Chris will go into more details about that. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, I think the big takeaway here is where Jamie was at was what has been happening, and that's starting to not work. What we're talking about now is what we're trying to transition into. And it's unclear if these are going to work perfectly or if they're the right solution or the only solutions, but they're what's on the table right now. And so that's the competitive pricing out of Washington, D.C., that's moving towards road usage fees, and then potentially moving towards tolling, at least as it relates to big interstate projects. Do you have any questions for me here at this section?
Commissioners, do we have any questions for Trent on either the competitive pricing model or the tolling situation? Okay, I'm going to ask a really obvious question. Has not tolling been passed by the Oregon legislature?
I think that's a hard question to answer. The legislature, I don't think they're the ones who decide who does or doesn't toll. So ODOT already has the authority from the Federal Highway Administration to be able to toll with traditional tolling. And then they had to pursue authority from also the Federal Highway Administration to do this other type of tolling, which I think is, so they have authority to do one, and I think they still need to seek authority to do the other. But Jamie and Chris are going to get into the weeds about that.
Is that further in the presentation today?
Yes, it is.
Okay, then I'll wait for that. Thank you. I have a couple commissioners in the queue.
Yes.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, on road user fee versus gas tax, how would the road user fee be implemented for Oregon cars, out-of-state cars, and commercial freight? Gas tax is easy to collect because you collect it at the pump. But how would we implement a road user fee on a road that is used as much by interstate commerce as it is by our local citizens?
It's a really good question. I don't think the OreGo program would be able to capture anybody who's not registered in the state of Oregon. But that's Oregon's solution. I know that there are also conversations at the federal level. The new Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, has also already started having conversations about transitioning the nation towards a road user system. And so most of our road funding programs come from, yes, our local gas taxes, but also there's a federal gas tax. And so sort of the complement of, nationwide shift towards road user fees would perhaps help supplement some of that, but it wouldn't be perfect. The current system's not perfect either.
Okay.
No more questions, Christina? Okay, you can continue, thank you.
Thank you. So the next portion of our presentation is Jamie and Abe.
Oh, here we go, tolling program history.
Here it
What do
is.
you know?
Yes, here we go. So we're going to dive into this, and happy to answer your questions when we get to the end of this segment. So now we're going to dive a little deeper into the tolling program in Oregon. As Trent shared, HB 2017 directed ODOT to evaluate tolling for I-5 and 205. This led to the value pricing feasibility study that began in 2017. In 2019, the FHWA, or Federal Highway Administration, gave a thumbs up for continued toll implementation with some guidelines. So far, during this process, these first steps, ODOT has worked to scope the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, or environmental process that will guide this tolling program. They've established EMAC, which is the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, to develop equity framework for tolling in Oregon, which we're going to get into more in a minute. And they have also initiated the formal NEPA process specifically for 205. Clackamas County has been involved in this process. Staff has been reviewing draft documents, technical memoranda. We've facilitated board testimony in the NEPA process, which was included in your packet of materials for today. We've formally accepted the invitation to become a participating agency in the NEPA process. And also, staff has been involved in many committee meetings. So this graphic represents the decision-making structure for the tolling program. The committees that staff have been participating on are shown in the pink box at the bottom. And the blue boxes above that are different groups that will be providing input directly to the Oregon Transportation Commission, or the OTC. The first is, farthest to the right, is existing regional policy groups. That's groups such as this board, C4, R1 Act, and so on, already assembled groups that will be providing comment directly to the OTC. They will also be pursuing kind of standard public and community engagement, so they'll be doing in-person events, open houses, that kind of thing. And then, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, ODOT's working to do things differently than they have in the past. So that means that they're prioritizing equitable engagement, and they're going to be working with the community in many ways to make sure that all voices are heard in this process, especially those who have been historically underrepresented and underserved. Another major difference with this structure is the box you see at the far left in blue, the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. This group is charged with creating equity framework for this process and for making recommendations to the OTC, the final decision-making body, about equity. Abe Mullen from H3S serves as the county's representative on that group. I'll now turn this presentation over to Abe so he can share more with you about this work.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Board. My name is Abe Mullen. I'm with the Public Health Division and Department of Transportation and Development. And I've been participating in the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee meetings since March of 2020, and I'll share a quick overview of that work. It's a 15-member committee that is made up of folks with equity and mobility interests from the 4 counties that make up the metro region. And the main goal of the group is to help ODOT evaluate the development of the toll system and the toll system itself through an equity lens to ensure equitable outcomes and an equitable engagement process for the I-205 and I-5 toll projects. EMAC is working towards this with 3 main tasks: applying an equity framework, which was included in the policy packet for this session, to key milestone decisions and project developments for the toll program, recommending strategies to enhance mobility and equity in the toll projects, and supporting the development and implementation of the engagement plan for the NEPA process. I'll share some of the work we've completed so far and the next steps for the committee, but before we get to that, I'd like to share some definitions for equity in the context of this project specifically and the thinking behind them, because equity can mean different things in different contexts, and just want to ground the definition in terms of the tolling project. So the tolling program equity framework aligns with and is grounded in the state of Oregon COVID-19 response equity framework. And the Earmarks charter takes the first line of this definition. Equity acknowledges that not all people or all communities are starting from the same place due to historic and current systems of oppression. And then looks at the role the development of the highway system has played in creating inequities that we see today. So like Jamie was talking about, past land use and transportation investments and the resulting displacement and segregation that has occurred have greatly and disproportionately affected people with low incomes and people of color, as well as other marginalized groups. And so this is the context that EMAC looks at the definition of transportation equity through the just allocations of burdens and benefits within a transportation system. So this asks the question of what are those benefits, what are the burdens, who receives each, and how can we distribute them in a way to empower communities most impacted by past and current injustices and oppression. To work towards the answers to these questions and solutions, the toll program breaks equity down into two further ways: process equity and outcome equity. So process equity is focused on the methods used to develop the toll program and making sure there is meaningful participation throughout the course of program development, especially for groups who have been historically excluded from the transportation planning process and those that are currently underserved by it. And then outcome equity gets at the benefits and burdens piece, making sure that negative effects from the toll program don't disproportionately fall on the shoulders of those who have been most impacted in the past, and exploring how the toll program can provide and maximize benefit and overall transportation affordability, access to opportunity, and community health. So as I transition to my last slide about the work of the EMAC group, I just want to point out that part of that work is developing performance metrics to measure process and outcome equity. And those four categories that we're looking at are the blue on the screen now. So participation, overall transportation affordability, access to opportunity, and community health. So what we have done so far and where we're going, we've had 7 virtual meetings in which we've gotten to know each other, update and adopt the EMAC charter and equity framework, and most recently help shape a public involvement plan for the NEPA process and a set of performance metrics to measure process equity and NEPA engagement activities. Over the course of the next few meetings, we'll be holding workshops for the EMAC to discuss affordability, opportunity, health in light of the toll system, and brainstorm strategies to maximize equity and mobility, as well as performance metrics to measure those. And ultimately, we're heading towards completing an equity and mobility toll program report, which we'll share with the OTC in November. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions or share more information on the equity framework.
I have a question. Hang on a minute. I'm calling it up on my iPad. I've had a few technological problems this morning, so you're just going to have to bear with me. I've been working on these for an hour. When you talk about, geez, I'm still scrolling. The equity approach, a term came to mind on, I'm sorry, I'm still, definitions of equity. Okay, the slide 50 of 62. Under the state of Oregon definition of equity, and it says, equity actionably empowers communities most impacted by systemic oppression and requires the redistribution of resources, power, and opportunity to those communities. Can somebody explain this statement to me? It says redistribution. Does that mean people who can't afford tolls don't have to pay for them and then somebody else makes up the difference? Or does it mean that the tolling goes something else? The word redistribution, I would like somebody to talk to me about that. Yes, Trent.
Oh, I was trying to point up as though Abe were above us.
What?
I would like Abe to take this question.
Oh,
please.
Abe, go ahead, please.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's a large piece of the work that's still to be decided through the scope of the EMAC group. That definition is specifically for the COVID response, and I think the task that we have ahead of us over the next few months is to understand what are the best strategies to accomplish that with the toll program and where those fit into the buckets of community health, access to opportunity, and affordability.
Well, that still doesn't make any sense to me. And, you know, I'm having trouble understanding you. So if you can talk directly into your microphone or whatever you're using, it would be most helpful. We have the volume turned up high. So you said something about a COVID response in this statement. I mean, are you saying we're going to have COVID around the rest of our entire lives? I would think that the definition of equity regarding our transportation systems should be a statement that holds the test of time, not necessarily reacting to the political pressures of the day, if I understand what you're saying. So can you take another stab at that, Abe?
Yeah, I just shared that the definition for the tolling program transportation equity approach is grounded in the state of Oregon equity framework that was developed in COVID-19 response. So that just shares some of the background around historic oppression and why we see inequities today. I think that your question kind of digs at what will be discussed in the transportation affordability conversation and looking at, I'm pulling up the framework now. So 2 specific pieces that we'll be investigating are travel costs. So the change in travel costs for historically excluded and underserved communities in light of the toll program, and then financial barriers. So what are potential barriers that may limit the use of the toll facilities by historically excluded and underserved communities? So looking at things like for folks who are unbanked, how can we redistribute?
Just a minute, Abe, just a minute. Abe, Gary Schmidt.
Sorry, Abe, so that definition, I'm looking at the slide, that's from the state of Oregon, correct? That's not ours, that's the state's?
Yes.
Were you part of the work group that helped write that?
I was not.
Okay.
Okay.
So Chair Smith's question is about that last sentence, redistribution of resources. What does that mean? And I actually have that very same question. So if we don't know the answer, we just need to get that for the chair.
Yeah, and that would be fine, Abe. You don't have to answer that anymore. So the questions that either I or any of our commissioners pose, you can certainly go out and do your research and come back. To me, this is just a glaring definition that we have no idea what it means. Because we certainly have disparities of economies in this county, especially, and I would think all counties do. And so if you're driving west, you may not be able to afford the fees like Commissioner Savas said, or if you're traveling east, you may be more able to afford them. So we do have an east-west economic disparity that exists. I see Commissioner Scholl, you're in the queue.
Yes. I understand process equity and that everyone needs to have a voice in the future of their transportation system. But this is related to Chair Smith's question. I have a real hard time with outcome equity. Is outcome equity about having tolls paid by some people and not by others? It seems to me that it is a administrative nightmare kind of concept. Again, process equity, and everyone, regardless of their income, social status, neighborhood, I agree with that 100%. That's transparency. But outcome equity, I've had a hard time getting my head around that. Because everybody on the road who uses a road should pay equitably or evenly, right? You drive 50 miles on the road, I drive 50 miles on the road. Doesn't matter where we come from, what our racial background is, what our economic background is, we should pay the same. You and I pay the same at the gas pump now. When tolling is implemented, every citizen should have to pay the same. And so anyway, if your outcome equity is something that's going to be a huge administrative burden, I'm very concerned about that. Thank you.
That's an interesting statement, Commissioner Scholl. I tend to agree with that. Christina, we have somebody in the queue.
Yes, Commissioner Savas has the same.
Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I put my hand up, not necessarily to speak on this, but I do want to point out on this particular topic that Commissioner Scholl, your example of everyone should pay an equal share, that's more about equality and then equity is a different definition. So equity would mean trying to give everyone a fair shot at the same opportunity, whether that is transportation related or housing or whatever that may be. So I kind of sense that this broad definition is not just transportation. It is about bigger things, even though it was formed and derived from that Oregon equity framework. What I did want to just say prior to so much emphasis, and I'm not disputing the emphasis or the need for the emphasis on the BIPOC communities and people of low income that are struggling. So I'm not diminishing that whatsoever. But I did want to point out that in that one slide earlier with the 4 boxes of what ODOT would be looking for input, the one thing that I have been clamoring for, that one there, thank you, what I've been clamoring for a long time, even during the T2020 process that Metro put forward, and even on this one this morning in our meeting with our transportation folks this morning with our mayors and city councilors, was that the one voice that we really don't have or hear from is the business transportation freight service-oriented businesses that use the system for their livelihood and their employees, which are all of our citizens, right, of all the counties in the region. So that voice has been missing at the table, and we don't. I think that needs to be an added box, but that's not for us to decide. This is ODOT's structure, not ours. But I just want to point out that in these meetings that I've been going through for all these years, I have not really seen an adequate business voice for that, and it just seems to be that trying to lump them into public and community engagement doesn't really cover it. And granted, some businesses are owned by minorities, so they might fit very nicely into the first 2 boxes, but not really the real true business perspective, regardless of their origin or the color of their skin or their financial status. So I just want to point that out. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Christina?
Yes, I have Commissioner Fisher with her hand raised.
Commissioner Fisher, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. So I think this is a really fascinating conversation, and it's really an important one. And we do have a very important voice, as we are a big part of the state of Oregon, actually, with all the residents that we have in Clackamas County. The one thing that and I've been texting, I just texted Martine, understanding the differences between equality and equity are very, very important, because equality just assumes that everything's equal and everybody pays the same amount or has the same adaptation or the same. But when you're looking at equity, you actually are looking at removing barriers so that you can have the same opportunity. And I'm hoping that, I text Martine, I'm hoping that we can just show this in an easy visual. There's one that really brought this home to me when I was at a conference back in Atlanta on walkability, and it talked about equity. And they had 3 children looking over the baseball game, and they were all of different sizes, and they were trying to look over the fence. And they put in one graphic the same level of a stool. And one child couldn't even see over the fence. One child could barely see over the fence. And then one child who was taller could totally see over the fence. And that would be equality. Everybody has the same situation. But with equity, you look at creating different size stools for the children to stand on to see the baseball game. But then also the last visual was removing all the barriers and simply getting rid of the fence. So equity is a way of leveling the playing field, and there are some really great graphics to see that. But I think it's important for us as we engage in these words, they have certain meanings, and it's important for us to understand what we're talking about.
Well, Commissioner Fisher, you bring up some interesting points. So as you say that, I'm thinking, equity is to remove barriers. Well, is the word redistribution going to be used to remove the barriers of equity? So that's my question that staff can figure out. Maybe that's how they're addressing it, but they're not saying the word barrier. We're just supposed to figure it out. That's, Martha, you're, Commissioner Schrader, would you like to speak? It popped up on my screen, Christina.
Yes. Commissioner Schrader?
No, maybe not. She can get in the queue when she wants to. Okay. I don't see any other comments, so I think we can continue with the presentation. Yes.
I just wanted to comment, we will get back to you on your question regarding redistribution. I think an important thing to note is we're early in the process, and I think that's what EMAC's job is going to be, is figuring out what that looks like. What are ways that we can remove those barriers? So I think it is related, but we'll get back to you with a more formal response.
Yep, I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to throw it over to Chris to talk more about the tolling program history.
All right, so let's dig a little deeper. First, I'll mention tolling. The word tolling is an umbrella term for all forms of tolling. So I think that's helpful to understand because there are multiple types of tolling. But there are really two primary types, and both of which are being considered by ODOT for the regional system and for I-205. So first is known as more traditional tolling, also known as Section 129 from the U.S. Code. And the primary purpose of that is to raise revenue for the purpose of paying for improvements to the facilities on which the tolls are located. Those tolls end when the project gets its needed funding. And as Trent mentioned, ODOT already, and I can't stress this enough, ODOT already has the authority to do this. They don't need federal approval to do this, but they do need to complete their NEPA analysis, which is currently underway. But at the federal level, they just need to have an MOU with the Federal Highway Administration for audit purposes. Only the improved segments are eligible to be tolled under this type. So in the case of 205, they could toll all lanes of the Abernethy Bridge if the bridge is reconstructed and seismically upgraded. The other type of tolling is known as value pricing or congestion pricing. Oregon is a member of a federal pilot program, a federal value pricing pilot program. And its primary purpose is to manage congestion on the system. But it also has the effect of raising revenue, but that's not the primary purpose of this type. Value pricing can be permanent. ODOT would, as part of, if implemented, ODOT would first have to develop a value pricing tolling plan. And it could be applied broadly on the system to help manage congestion. Just like traditional tolling, it requires a full NEPA analysis. And most importantly, and different from traditional tolling, it would require federal approval to be done. And I'll just point out, there's one other term that floats out there quite a bit known as variable pricing, meaning the costs of the tolls fluctuate, like over the course of a day. That can be under both types of tolling, if ODOT chose to put that forward. And to your question, Chair Smith, about what what the legislature has mandated, 4 years ago under HB 2017, the legislature mandated ODOT seek federal approval to be able to implement value pricing on I-5 and I-205, and upon getting that approval, implement it. So they are under this mandate from the state to implement value pricing, specifically on I-5 and I-205 between the Columbia River and where those two interstates connect in the Tualatin area. So as I mentioned, both types of tolling options are under consideration for the entire system and for I-205. No decision has been made on that yet by ODOT until NEPA is complete. Any questions before this next slide?
I just want to point out, go ahead.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
I just want to point out one thing that is said in the region quite a bit, and that is that congestion pricing, variable pricing, is designed to change behaviors. And so for my colleagues on the commission, I just want to let you know that I have been advocating that value pricing or congestion pricing with that particular goal of changing behavior when there are no alternatives is more about extraction of our tax dollars. So that's been one of my arguments I've been making. So I just want to leave you with that, and I'll just stop there.
Well, Paul, I'm glad you brought that up. What behavior do they want us to change? Not get to work on time? You know,
Well, yeah.
you know, we
well-
have our traditional times we go to work. We have rush hour in the AM and in the PM. I don't like that. If I was to take a stand on anything, it would be the behaviors of people. You know, we're already going through such changing behaviors with our COVID lockdowns, up and down and backwards and sideways. To me, I would agree that this behavior in congestion pricing and value pricing is not something that I would support, but I don't know if I have a choice in that. Commissioner Schull.
Yes, value pricing is particularly difficult for the small businessman. If you go on 205 at 0630 to 0830 or 1630 to 1830 in the evening, you will see a huge number of small business vehicles. They operate during the hours of like 7 o'clock in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, because before that they can't work, after that they can't work. So value pricing, if you're going to exclude them from the morning rush hour or the evening rush hour, you are going to force them to shift their work hours to work hours that their customers aren't available. So that's my comment on value pricing. Thank you.
Thanks. I see a red light on.
Commissioner Savas has the same
Commissioner
raise?
Savas, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other thing to add. This was actually brought to my attention by one of the mayors from Washington County, and no one's has contradicted it, or so everyone seemed to agree that it's pretty well the status, and that is that if we were actually to do what is proposed, you know, this map that's currently shown here, where we start tolling everything, the interstates and the local roads, but let me just say that there's nowhere in the statement is there's nowhere in the country where all lanes are tolled. Okay, usually they toll 1 or 2 lanes, but they don't toll all the lanes. So we will be the great experiment, and to be actually add to compound that, we may be the only part of the country where not only are the interstates tolled completely, but also all the local roads are tolled. So we're going to be the great experiment, it appears.
Why are they doing that, Paul?
Well, that remains to be answered, because I've been asking the question: is this about revenue generation, or is this about behavior change? And so I depending on who you ask and what time of the day it is and what day of the week, you get a different answer.
Okay.
I think that's something we're trying to figure out, actually.
Let's have staff
Because
make.
if it's about revenue generation, the question is, do we get some of that, or do we get less of that, or who gets it? So. And what do we do with it? I think some people believe that if we're going to toll it, if we're going to toll something, that the revenues that are generated should go towards building that capacity and building capacity in the future. And there are some people that are adamantly opposed to that.
Yeah, we'll have staff look into that too.
Can you clarify the question?
Well, we're tolling all lanes. And according to Commissioner Savas, this is the first of that in the United States. Usually they toll 1 or 2 lanes, and, we've all traveled to the east in California, and you go to a certain part, if you take this exit, it's subject to a toll, and other parts are not. I mean, I just drove up from San Diego. And I was particularly paying attention to the interstate system as we were on and off, back and forth, and there's tolls all over the place. But it's not always, and it's not all lanes, as Commissioner Savas said. And so that's one question. The other question, does congestion pricing, is that designed to change behavior? That's another area that we need some exploration on. I don't know if you can get these answers, but those are certainly issues that this commission has.
I'm happy to respond. Now, Commissioner Savas is correct. We have confirmed this with ODOT. There is not another place in the United States where they are tolling all lanes. So that is a new approach that they are taking, looking at doing
Okay,
that here.
why? We want to know why, what the benefit is, and the distribution of the money. Does that help you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from commissioners before we continue? I really like this map, by the way, with the little purple roads. Yeah. Yeah. Chris,
Okay,
are you up?
Yep, let's get into this map. So this brings us up to present day. ODOT has created this, what's called the Comprehensive Congestion Management and Mobility Plan, the CCAMP or CCMMP. And as you see on it, it includes the projects from HB 2017, like I-205, Highway 217, and the Rose Quarter, and adds other projects of statewide significance like the Boone Bridge, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project on I-5 over the Columbia. And this concept is ODOT's Urban Mobility Office's attempt to actualize the direction from the legislature from HB 2017 and their approach to looking at the system holistically. So in other words, how are they going to fund and complete all these projects? And this process is really just beginning. And we often say that we have more questions than answers because new information is coming up all the time. But for our purposes, and as we've said, ODOT is leaving all the tolling options on the table right now as they embark on this environmental process. And you can see the corridors that are shown in purple, I-205 and I-5, not including I-84, are what are being examined right now for potential tolling.
Interesting.
And then on the next slide, you'll see we have an evolving draft plan from ODOT showing their current project timeline and the cost estimates for each of these projects, and this is intended to really guide their investments. So a few key points to talk about. First, you'll see the I-205 Phase 1 Abernathy project is by far the most ready to go. It's at 90% design currently, and it'll be shovel-ready by the end of this year. Meanwhile, another project that's in the news quite a bit, the Rose Quarter, as we know it, there's been quite a bit of controversy over that, and that one is still at least a couple years away from being shovel-ready. And then a third element up here is the tolling project in and of itself, and implementation of tolling isn't due to come online until at least 2024, but I would say we're looking probably closer to 2026, 2027 before that's actually ready to go. So again, lots more questions and answers, but most importantly, how are they going to fund all of these projects that currently don't have the funding they need, like 205, like the Boone Bridge, like the I-5 bridge, and even the Rose Quarter, which doesn't have all of the monies it needs for completion. But for most of the projects, or for this entire timeline here, to be implemented in this manner, it requires them to figure out how they're going to fund all of this. It's all contingent on that. So for the time being, in the case of I-205, because of this lack of funding, the current plan is to rely on, out of necessity, on tolling revenues whenever those come online in a handful of years, unless other monies become available. And as I said, that project is pretty much ready to go. So unless they are able to get money in the near term, the project will just sit on a shelf with the design ready to go. And nobody wants to see that happen because we're looking at about a $15 million cost increase every year that it sits on a shelf. So that brings us to this past month, Speaker Kotek put forward an amendment to a bill to try to find a solution here. She really wants to see something be done to address this current challenge and allow all these projects to move forward under this current timeline. So as Trent mentioned, I think one of the key pieces here is that penny that was put into HB 2017 4 years ago, dedicated to the Rose Quarter to help pay for that project. because of the lack of readiness of that project right now, there's been a lot of talk about how can that penny be used to help move other projects forward. And so her amendment proposes to make that a regional penny or a flexible penny so that some of it can be used to move some of these other projects forward while we're waiting for the Rose Quarter to be construction ready. And her amendment does lots of things, but I'm just referring to this one specific piece relating to the funding and 205. So right now, this amendment is being discussed by stakeholders, and it is in the Joint Transportation Committee of the Legislature, which has another month or so before they need to, before the next deadline that they have to get bills passed by. So they have a little bit more time to try to figure this out. But right now, the current amendment would, as I said, make this penny flexible and help fund projects of statewide significance in the region. But there are strings attached, specifically that if a project is to receive any of those monies, it has to be in part a project that is partially funded by tolling revenues. That's subject to change. Again, there's lots of conversations currently underway, and it's continuing to evolve. And the last thing I'll add is that one other piece that is out there that we've talked about is federal funding. There are potential multiple opportunities at the federal level that could help pay for a project like I-205, which, given the fact that it's shovel-ready, certainly puts it into a place where it could be very competitive for funds like that. And that could be a way to help backfill some of the funding needs until something like tolling revenues were to come online and be available later. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jamie, and she'll take it from here.
Okay, so now I'm just going to share with you the tolling program timeline, kind of where we're going from here. So ODOT's launching into the formal environmental process for I-205 Abernathy. That's from Stafford Road to 213. Right now, they're in the middle of a bunch of technical analysis. They will have a draft preferred alternative published by December of 21. They'll be working with EMAC in this process, and we'll get a recommendation from them on equity and mobility strategies right before they publish the toll project decision in January of 2023. So you can see here, we still have years of conversation and evolution of the concepts before we get to the end of the process. At the same time that this is happening, ODOT is kicking off what they call a planning and environmental linkages study for the remainder of I-5, or for all of I-5 and the remainder of 205, outside of that Stafford to 213 area, to look at this value pricing program or the congestion pricing approach, as well as evaluating Section 129 for components of that. So they're doing that in a separate NEPA process. They're starting that right now. They're going to move into screening of initial alternatives this summer. They'll refine those alternatives and develop their purpose and needs statement this winter. And then they'll kick off the NEPA alternatives process in the winter of 2021, and that'll last into 2022. So essentially, they're doing the pre-NEPA work until the end of this year on that broader system, and then they'll launch into the formal NEPA process, likely winter of 21, early 2022. And then they'll have a couple of years there where they're working through that NEPA process. So again, we're at the beginning of a very long technical conversation.
So you're saying it would be 2 years to do the NEPA process regardless of the funding source, even if the federal government said, okay, we'll pay for it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they still have to go through and evaluate all the environmental.
Just the initial NEPA, it would be another 2 years.
Yes, 2 years is what they're anticipating. Mm-hmm. Plus.
Can we light a fire under them? Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Actually, that's all I have. So that kind of completes the tolling program section of the presentation. So I want to ask, do you have questions about tolling? And also a second question, would you like some briefings on the tolling program from ODOT staff? We haven't brought that in front of you yet, but I wanted to throw that idea out there.
Okay, let's discuss that later. And commissioners, that's an offer that's being made, and we can decide on that later. I want to finish what our charge is today. I see Commissioner Scholl, you have a question?
Yes. On your slide that showed the costs for the different projects, I-205, Phase 1, 410 million to 460 million. Phase 2, 190 million to 240 million. That's 700 million bucks. Okay? 700 million.
Correct.
Right, okay. Now, my opinion is the money is here. Okay. The commuter rail system between Beaverton and Wilsonville is losing $1 million a month. That's taxpayer money. Metro plans to invest $3.5 billion in the TriMet Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Project. $3.5 billion. Those monies are coming out of taxation of the people who live in the people and businesses who live in the urban growth boundary. Now, I bet you $100, I'll put $100 on the table right there, that nobody in this room is ever going to ride that when it's built. My point is this. We're talking about a situation that is a great need to the people of the region, if not the whole West Coast. And we're looking at $700 million for this I-205 project. Yet, at the same time, 20 miles away, TriMet is planning to spend $3.5 billion on a short stretch, I'm not sure how many miles it is, of this new Southwest Corridor light rail. The people are paying the money. It's just a matter of this. It looks to me like we have by the way, let me just say that everybody in this room, I appreciate all your work. But it looks to me like we have a loggerhead here between those entities that want a different concept for transportation. And over here we have commerce, business, and the people of the region and of Clackamas County, of whom I am most concerned about, want something different, okay? I mention that only because it appears to me that the money is being already taxed from the people in business to pay for transportation. And just a matter of resolving this conflict between the concept of getting us out of our cars and onto light rail, which none of my constituents have ever said to me, Mark, that's what I want. And for the people who insist that the future of our area is going to be people riding mass transit. So I'm not sure how to resolve this, but the money's out there. And your $700 million that you want, that you suggest the ODOT needs to do the I-205 project, to me, that's reasonable. I would pay that. And I bet you everybody in the county would say, yes, Mark, that is a worthy expenditure. So let me just
I
sum
think
this.
those are really interesting
Let me
points.
just sum this up. Yes, thank you. But let me sum this up just by saying this. The people are taxed already. They work, they toil, they budget, and now they're asking me, wait a minute, for decades we've been paying the gas tax, where'd all that money go? Okay? And my answer is, well, I'm not really too sure. But all I'm saying here this morning is this. The people are already taxed. They don't want tolling. They want to be able to move across the region in an efficient manner. And so my concern is somehow we need to get a rope around this problem and use the money that the people are already being taxed for to actually go to the projects the people need and desire. Thank you very much.
You bring up some really interesting points that I do think need a look-see at.
So I'll add just a couple comments to that. I think first, you're right in the sense that, there are different interests looking at different solutions, and I think most out there are looking at an all of the above solution. How can we address the mobility on the interstate highway system? How can we use light rail to help alleviate some of the congestion on the interstate system, other multimodal or other local road projects, all of which have a symbiotic relationship on each other to improve the system as a whole. I think to your point about transit, they are facing the same thing, the same challenges that ODOT is in terms of funding and how do you pay for these projects. In the case of the Southwest Corridor, they tried to take that to the ballot in November and it didn't pass. So they don't have the money for that project and they're still trying to figure out how are they going to pay for that. And meanwhile, as we've talked about, the legislature is still grappling with how are they going to, in the face of these declining revenues in the gas tax, which can only be used on the interstate system per the Constitution, how are they going to catch up those revenues to be able to pay for these projects that the state acknowledges are of statewide significance. So I think you're right that, this is a challenge and no one has the perfect solution and there's not a magic bullet of a pot of revenue sitting out there right now, and they're trying to come up with any creative solution to get us there.
Thank you for that. I see we have some commissioners in the queue. Staff, I'm confused. We've been lobbying our congressional delegation, telling them that I-205 in Abernathy is shovel-ready. And now you tell me NEPA is 2 years out. I don't consider that to be a shovel-ready project. Could you help me with that?
Yes. Oh, sorry. The NEPA process for the tolling project that would be over I-205 is 2 years out. For the I-205 widening and seismic improvement project itself, that NEPA is already done. Environmental analysis is already there. They could start building that at the end of the year. It's just the NEPA process to do the tolling project, to toll the project. It is confusing. It took me a long time to grapple with it. I think it's an excellent point, Chair. Think of them as related but different. To build the stuff, to build the road, to fix the bridge, the environmental analysis work is done. To implement tolling in that area also requires a NEPA process.
So would we build it before we told it?
I think that's a decision that ODOT would make.
Well, then, if we have to toll it before we build it, we're not shovel-ready.
I think.
I'm correct on that. Yes, I am.
Okay.
So we need to figure this out, folks.
I would add, tolling is not required in order for them to build this if other funding is available.
Yeah, but Chris, if we don't have other funding, if it doesn't come through,
Right.
Then
we are
we're still in a
completely
world of
reliant
hurt.
on tolling, which is years away.
yeah, okay. This needs to be really examined. Christina, who's in the queue?
Commissioner Savas has.
Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Commissioner Savas, you're on mute.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to some of the comments that have been made. The big reason that we're here today, frankly, is this is a very complex thing. And I think even this morning with our local mayors and city councilors that are part of our transportation committee discussion, I broached this same thing. How do we bring everyone up to speed on all these changes and all these dynamics and all these complexities of transportation funding? So Commissioner Scholl, as you stated, these things, appear to be, maybe out of balance. I'm not going to disagree with that in certain context. So for example, the earmark dollars that are, if you look at almost everything we do now goes through these equity lenses, it goes through these climate lenses and so forth. So almost everything we do, we have to have policies that match or we become ineligible for even basic things like building roads. Even that has to go through all those lenses and processes, and we need to check the boxes in order to be eligible for those funds. If you look at the earmarks, the proportion of earmarks, they got a section for broadband, they got a section for for seismic bridge building. They got a section for rail. They got a section for transit, all these things. But if you look at the proportionality of those dollars, those proportionality don't match maybe public opinion or public polling, for example. And I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. I just want to just say that for the public doesn't really understand this, nor do a lot of folks that are, looking at government and saying, why is this happening or why is this not happening? So the other thing I wanted to say is that, transit for the most part around the country, there's probably very few exceptions to this, but the general rule is transit is known as something that needs to be subsidized. It doesn't make money. It doesn't even balance. It's always been a subsidy of sorts. So with the whole thing of mobility, the term mobility gets to, for example, it's more appropriate to talk about those alternatives and all those factors that move people, especially in the metro region. Let's just say Washington, D.C. I mean, a lot of people don't own cars in Washington, D.C. When we go to Washington, D.C., we use either the metro, the subway, or we use a cab or whatever it may be. But for the most part, urban cities, metropolitan areas are going through this conversion, so to speak. That's a broad statement, but I just wanted to say that the funding and the funding streams don't match, but the need to do the equity, the need to do the climate thing is something that's federally required, not locally required. And of course, we have to comply so that we also require it locally because it's part of the bigger chain of funding. Commissioner Smith, just to quickly address the points, what tolling comes first, is the chicken or the egg. If we get the earmark to build the Abernathy Bridge, then we can kickstart that program. I think the speaker's amendment that Chris spoke to earlier, or Trent spoke to earlier, if that makes that penny flexible, then they can use some of those funds to kickstart the program. But I think what they're trying to do, basically, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying what it is that basically they want to let us know that if we do that flexible penny, we're basically obligating, the strings attached, obligating ourselves to the bulk of that funding coming in the future from tolling or congestion pricing, whatever it may be. So that is their plan, essentially, and they're still sorting it out. They haven't made, there's no certainty as how they make this happen. They are really building the plane as they're flying it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I don't see any more commissioners in the queue. Can we continue?
Yes, ma'am. And actually, I have the privilege of telling you we're almost done with our presentation. So,
Yeehaw!
before I jump into that, let me just start by saying you've heard us say the word and the name ODOT many times today, and that's because they've been a great partner in helping us build this presentation. I just want to acknowledge that we are not ODOT, and that if we've misrepresented ODOT in any way, hopefully they give us a nice polite call and a gentle reminder that we are good friends and working together to try to figure this out. But they've been a good partner in this, and this is their information mostly that we get the privilege of sharing with you. And as we've talked about, they've been directed to go and do this work. They are the implementers, and they're the ones to have to implement it and figure out what that looks like. And we have a role in that work because we are potentially the recipients of a future tolling program, potentially here in Clackamas County. And so I think it's very clear for everybody that you've mentioned yourselves talking to that nobody likes tolling. No one likes to spend extra money on things that they don't already spend money on. Nobody does. But we do know it's coming because they've been authorized to pursue it, which is the challenging piece for it. And I'll say, too, on behalf of PGA and here at Clackamas County, we are fighting for every option besides tolling. Daily, hourly, every email that we write is pursuit of something different because we hear you loud and clear. This is not the preferred approach. But it is what ODOT's been authorized to do. And we're at a point now as they're building this plane as it's being flown, as Commissioner Savas said. I like that analogy a lot. We need to have some guidance from the board on how to engage in that conversation in a meaningful way that represents Clackamas County residents, businesses, and our visitors who potentially would be paying a future toll here in Clackamas County if it were to be implemented here. And so, as we've said, this process we're early in the process. they're building this now. We want to be engaged. We want to be at the table and be in a leadership position as this tolling program and policy is being built. And something that gives us an ability to be nimble in that room rather than a hard line of yes or no, we think would be beneficial to us. And as Jamie said earlier, we have way more questions than we do answers. So many questions. And it's really complex, and it's taken an hour and a half to get to where we are today, just to kind of highlight how complex it is. So what we have for you to hear today is a proposed set of values and outcomes that, if the board agrees, would give you and staff clear policy objectives to pursue as ODOT continues to pursue this method of tolling. And that's included in your packet. It's also on the next slide, but I think we could probably close the slide presentation so that we can all see each other. And what we're going to transition to now is a chance for us to listen to you, board, as we talk about this values document here and what you would prefer it to look like. And as I introduce that to you, it's titled, and if I understand your edit from earlier, Chair Smith, the Clackamas County Values on Surface Transportation Funding for the Interstate System in the Portland Metropolitan Area. And there are 3 sections I'd like to.
Trent, yeah. So, Commissioners, it is our intention today that we pass this document. We can take time to wordsmith it as necessary for any Commissioner's input, including the title. And so with that in mind, Trent, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate staff and what you've been doing. I would agree that you have been on top, all of you, been on top of trying to find an alternative funding sources. And I think you did just yeoman's work when Commissioner Savas and I testified before a federal delegation. When was that? March? February? It's all a blur to me.
February.
And I think our voices were very loud and clear, and they were quite understandable. The federal delegation likes I-205 because, indeed, it is shovel-ready if they provide the money. That's all they have to do. And coming from the new administration in town, in Washington, D.C., they are really looking at projects that meet that criteria of being shovel-ready. So I know staff and Summit Strategies will continue to push that through. Okay, now with that in mind, Commissioners, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get this document to a place where we can pass it today. I see a light on.
Commissioner Fisher has her hand raised.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I had a question about, and Chair Smith, you mentioned that you really like the map. And I've been looking at that map. I'm kind of beside myself and trying to wrap my mind around, on the map on page 28, it has the current toll corridor, which, as Commissioner Savas has said repeatedly, is a part of the transportation structure that doesn't have alternatives. And I just don't understand how we've come this far and that isn't considered by these policymakers. And I know we're going to move into values and it's going to be really important, but I'm really wanting to understand how we get to a place that makes absolutely no sense when who's deciding this? Why is this happening?
In relation to the map, is that what you're saying, Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, the area of the map where it says it's a current toll corridor.
Uh-huh.
And it goes over the water.
Uh-huh.
And I've done this trip multiple times, and I know where it goes. It's the two-way part of the highway that goes through West Lynn. And I guess you could divert through West Lynn and through Stafford for some of it. But Paul, maybe you have some context because you've been at the table. How can this even be considered a good idea at all?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. It's been very frustrating for me to represent Clackamas County with this particular predicament. And in recognition of that, I would just add that we have been really hammering away for long before this whole thing on getting more transit. So we have been told, and staff, correct me if I speak in error, I don't mean to, but we have been told that potentially some of this revenue could be used for transit. Now, and I asked it, can it be operations and maintenance? And then that was a maybe. Maybe it could be operations and maintenance because that is the biggest ongoing expense. If it's part of the NEPA approval process where the federal government allows or gives permission, as I understand it, it's easier for them to build, a bus stop or a sidewalk with transportation or tolling dollars if they were to do that. But no one's guaranteed, ODOT or Metro or anyone else are guaranteed or supported, frankly, that they will add transit to us. So I've used the word absent alternatives, it's extraction. It's extraction of our tax dollars. That affects everyone. We can't, and to Commissioner Scholl's earlier point, we're going to build so much administration trying to create equity so that we redirect some of those tolling dollars to give people either a discount or a free pass to drive or to take transit or whatever it may be. But there's a lot of people in the middle, businesses and so forth, that are going to be impacted by this. So it's not good. I don't have a good answer, but we have people saying congestion pricing, everything will solve the problems. It'll reduce it. We don't even need to add. I mean, there's so many different opinions, and some of them I don't think are have any good factual foundation to even be said, but they get airtime, they get political airtime, and it's frustrating. There is no answer. I'm hoping that we can do that, but frankly, I just tell people it's your lawmakers, it's your elected officials that are represented in the state legislature and in Washington, D.C. That's where you need to start voicing your concerns.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments. I probably now is time to turn our attention to our value statement. Commissioner Savas, can you help work on the title of this? It says Clackamas County Values on Proposed Funding Solutions. I'd like to insert the word transportation solutions. Do we want to say instead interstate/road transportation funding solutions? What do you want to say there?
Well, maybe it ought to be Clackamas County Values on Proposed Transportation Funding Solutions.
Just plain transportation.
Yeah, transportation. Yeah, transportation funding solutions, because that's what we're really asking for.
Okay, all right. Commissioners, does that look good to you?
I think that would be fine.
Seeing no objections, that's the title. Staff, do you understand that?
I just want to clarify that there's that third line there, so it would be Clackamas County Values for Transportation Funding Solutions for the interstate system in the Portland metropolitan area. Is that correct?
This third line, Commissioners, for the interstate system in the Portland metropolitan area.
Yeah, I'll give one comment on that, and that is that, and it's a question to staff, actually. So if we have our second work session on transportation funding for the local system, are we going to be changing the name to include it holistically? Because we were only talking about the interstate system today, and there's a nexus between all of that. So do we anticipate different Clackamas County values?
My recommendation is that this be very focused on this.
Because it has to do with tolling, right?
That's
Trent?
correct.
I think this is why we brought this forward, Paul. If we want to do something different for the other. Okay, all righty.
All right.
Okay, well, I'm going to give it a, I made a couple notes. I printed it off. I made a couple notes, Commissioners. Maybe you did too. The first section, to ensure safe, equitable, regional interstate system funding solutions should, 1, support timely allocation of funds to construct the projects of statewide significance from House Bill 2017. Is there an issue with that, Commissioners? Second line, to ensure net toll revenue be reinvested in projects identified by an inclusive public process led by ODOT and coordinated with the local governments. I like that because I don't think we've been well, whatever, I'm not going to make any more statements. Any Commissioner thoughts on that?
Yes.
Go
Chair.
ahead, Paul.
I think that I'm okay with that worded as it is, if that we have a companion public process because we can't really control what other people in the region think. So let's just say that that inclusive public process is heavily populated or engaged by people from Portland, for example. Our voices may be, number one, we could be easily outnumbered. We already are from a population standpoint. So will our voice be diminished by that?
I don't know. Good question. Trent?
Yeah, so this has actually been the bullet that we've spent the most time on for sure as we
I
prepared
bet.
this presentation. So I think our intention here is to bring the local process home to Clackamas County
Yeah.
for projects that are here in Clackamas County. I am really fond of a quote that is used at the Association of Oregon Counties a lot, which is, if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. And I think that's true for our region as well. Especially as it relates to our system here. I think that's what we're talking about as it relates to, the impacts here in Clackamas County and to our communities. And so what we're meaning here, what our intent is that if there's going to be some sort of conversation around what happens or what sort of impacts are happening around I-205, for example, that be a public process that's conducted locally, that Clackamas County would be engaged or our cities would be engaged with ODOT.
Right.
And if something's happening up there at the Rose Corridor, for example, that be locally up there with Portland and the communities around that project.
Yeah, and I like the term local governments. It includes county and our states and any other stakeholders within our county. We could view it that way. I see a light on, Christina.
Commissioner Fisher has her hand raised.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, my only concern with the way this is worded is that it is, in my mind, it assumes that there will be tolling. And I know that the legislature's studying it, but I would like to leave it open and make it a little broader than just tolling. And I don't know, Paul, you have to help here with the wording, if it's congestion pricing or value pricing or tolling. Those are three distinct terms and they all have different meanings. I'm not sure what the correct meaning would be, but I think it should be qualified to maybe say ensure that any net tolling, not to assume that there will be a net tolling revenue. Because I still want to try to fight this for Clackamas County. I just can't see how it'll be equitable for our residents.
Okay, I'm okay, Commissioner Fisher, with adding the word any net tolling. What does staff think?
Works for us.
Okay, it works for them.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. Thank you, Commissioner Fisher and Commissioner Smith. I would add that, including your words, but right after net toll revenue, net toll or congestion pricing revenue.
Okay.
I have a suggestion as staff. Curious if we could just remove all the details since we know so little right now and just say revenue. Ensure that revenue be reinvested. That way it leaves it open and we can evolve it as we learn more.
Not staff, commissioners, what do you think about just leaving revenue?
Sounds like a good idea. It's cleaner.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do. And if, this is a working document. If we need to change it, we'll change it. Okay, thank you. Revenue, is that okay with everybody? Okay. Are we ready to move on to the third line, the third bullet point? Okay, elevate engagement with people who have been historically left out of policy discussions, such as low-income families and people of color. I like this because we're viewing this whole document through an equity lens. Any comments?
To my earlier point, I'm just wondering if, and I don't want to put more emphasis on what I'm going to say here over the people of color and low income, but I'd like some emphasis maybe on a separate bullet that that it touches the business and the commerce elements of the people who use the system that cannot use transit.
Okay, is that listed in Hall? Well, it says, see, business enterprise down below. Has business and commerce been listed in this document? I don't remember.
It'll be in the next
Paul,
subsection.
it'll be in the next bullet. Maybe we can wait until we get down a little bit further on the next bar. And then if it's not adequate, we can beef that up. That's according to
Okay.
Trent. Okay. Light is on.
Commissioner Fisher has her hand
Commissioner
raised.
Fisher?
Yeah, I'm not sure where this goes at all, but when we had our last conversation looking at our plan for the future for transit, it was so clear that our communities that are outside of the core around the Willamette River have been really disenfranchised from planning for how you move around this region. And so just big picture here, we have people right now moving out to Malala, moving out to Canby, and they're moving there because they want to get out of a sort of phonetic life in more urbanized areas, and they can't afford the areas that are in the more urbanized areas. And so you have people moving out and there isn't transportation. So we have to figure this out and somehow have that lens of, and those have been, I know that we're talking equity lens, people of color, low income, but our rural communities, I mean, you look at Estacada and their transportation system, they have not had a fair seat at the table throughout our planning in Clackamas County. I'm throwing that out, and I don't know where it goes, but we have to look at that as well.
Well, I think this statement is pretty good. Are you wanting to beef up the statement, Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I don't know what I want. I'm just issue spotting, throwing it out.
Okay, good. Well, let's just kind of ruminate on that, and as we go through this document, maybe something else will pop
just-
up. I
a
see another
suggestion.
light on. I see another light on, and who is that?
Commissioner Schrader has her
Commissioner
hand up.
Schrader? I'm trying to manage it,
So-
Commissioners.
I know it's difficult with us. To Sonia's point, why don't we put something in there about specifically with transportation access for our rural communities? What
Mention-
are the reasons, Canby has their own transit. Wilsonville is because TriMet was not serving them, which is kind of the same problem we have out in the Estacada area, Malala. I mean,
Well,
it just doesn't give them access.
Well, that's
So
an
maybe
idea.
we should
Martha, why
put
don't
a
we say,
comment.
why don't we say such as low-income families, comma, people of color, comma, and rural communities? Just add the term rural communities at the end of this sentence. Does that work? Trent? Trent has a comment.
I really like where this is going, and I think that there is a lot of value in including that part of Clackamas County in our values document. I'm wondering if we could put a pencil in this or put a pin in it as sort of a rural communities or commuters-based language. That it seems to me that might fit well in this second section here. And my recommendation would be to leave this primarily around the equity piece and think more about our community, our rural communities and our commuters as part of our community, holistic community would be my initial recommendations. of that.
Okay, I don't like using the word holistic.
Okay,
I don't want that in this document.
it's fine.
It's too subject to interpretation, and it's not definitive. Because holistic means to me medicine, so, but it means something to somebody else. Okay, we'll leave that there, and Martha, let's let Trent put that in the next one. So I'm gonna,
We can, just as long as it's reflected somewhere, I'm fine.
our light is on.
Commissioner Savas has his hand
Commissioner
raised.
Savas?
Yeah, Trent, I heard you loud and clear, and I also heard Commissioner Fisher and Schrader speak to that. But if you look at the next bullet, there's a perfect place to insert that geographic element in there. So the next bullet reads, establish viable alternative transportation options that support the functionality of the interstate system, such as accessible transit system in areas, and maybe we put urban and rural areas with inadequate service.
Do you like
Because that
that,
does
Trent?
speak to geography.
Trent, do you like it there, or do you want to?
At the end of the day, Chair, this is the board's document. If you feel like this is the appropriate place for it, we would support that. I think it works here very well.
Jamie?
Sounds fine.
Okay, Paul, we got that. Urban and rural insertion in areas, for instance, urban, rural with inadequate service. Okay, I'm writing that in.
Yeah, in urban, rural areas with inadequate service.
Okay, urban, rural. Got it. Okay, The last bullet on this section, support necessary improvements to accommodate the region's current and projected growth.
Hey, Chair Smith, I have my hand up on that issue for staff, on the previous issue, for staff to issue spot. So in my mind, if we're looking at value pricing or congestion pricing, and you have someone, say, South County, that needs to get to work through I-205, has to go all the way around and up. I don't want to see them I want to see some equity there for people that don't have options to travel if we go to value pricing and congestion pricing. I just want that to be a value for our residents.
Okay, all right. So commissioners, I'm just going to say as we continue this, I'm trying to manage your requests when they come in and when I see the red light on. It's not that I'm ignoring you. There could be a delay when you put your hand up on your little screen at home till it gets to Christina, and then Christina flashes my red light on the panel sitting next to me. It's not that I'm ignoring you. And maybe this is why we all should be in person doing these types of exercises. I will say again. Okay, so we're going to have to be patient. Now, we're on to the next bar. It says, to support a vibrant economy and ensure the reliable movement of people and goods, funding solutions should. This is what our funding solutions should. And the first bullet says, ensure that no tolling or congestion pricing occurs on any one part of the system prior to the full system implementation to avoid economic disadvantages or unfair burdens on people or communities and businesses. Trent, is this where you were talking about businesses?
Businesses as well as rural communities, I think, also apply here.
What was the other term? Commerce.
Commuters, I'm sorry, that's the word I was using earlier.
Yeah, on communities, businesses, and the movement of commerce. Do we like movement of commerce?
That's a point I think that is getting lost in all of this at the state level, at the regional level, all around, is that people are just assuming that congestion pricing and changing people's behavior or all of these things where somehow limiting capacity or throughput on our system is somehow a good thing to reduce congestion. And my point is that, do you realize you're choking the main artery for our economic engine? And that piece, I politely use the word commerce. If we're going to grow our economy and commerce needs to be, use the system, that anything that restricts that growth to some degree, and I'm not saying adds a zillion lanes. I know some people will take that as a meaning. That's not what I'm saying. It's really about how we get the throughput. So I would like, it doesn't have to be commerce per se, but I just want to that point I think needs to be made somewhere in here that we're not, I don't think we're necessarily calculating that in the future.
Well, we need to make a decision, so I'm going to put movement of commerce in addition to that for now. If it doesn't work, if we don't see another place, we'll come back to it. Okay, second bullet point, maintain a transportation system that is dependable and predictable to attract new businesses and industry and provides reliable travel times for commuters and employers. I like that statement. Do we want to add to it, commissioners?
It's good the way it is.
Looks good to me.
Okay. And the last bullet point, enhance opportunities for disadvantaged business enterprise, DBE, in capital projects and incorporate construction career pathways, C2P2 strategies to promote diversity in skilled construction occupations. Now, why is construction occupations listed here?
So I can take a crack at that one. So C2P2 is a program to provide opportunity for diversity, so to provide training for people who may not have traditionally been able to get into those fields of work. It's a program that the county is already working on, so we would just say, for any funding solutions that are coming forward, moving forward capital projects, we'd want to see opportunities for that program to be implemented. Does that make sense?
Yep, okay, and that's fine. No, I like it. I mean, we're calling out construction. I love construction. Are you kidding me? Commissioner Stoll, you were in the shoot?
That
You're
answered the
good.
question.
There's a light on. Christina?
Commissioner Savas. is
Commissioner
attending.
Savas, you're up.
Yeah, well, one other factor to answer your question, Chair, and that is that there is and there's going to be a greater shortage of workers in this trade because of all
Yeah.
these transportation dollars. So we need the workforce.
I agree. It's really hard to find anybody to put a roof on your house. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So if we're okay for now on this, I'm going to move down to the third section. To prioritize disaster resiliency and climate action, funding solutions should, number one, provide safe, efficient evacuation routes during natural disasters. Man, somebody must have been listening to me. Such as wildfires and earthquakes, by upgrading vulnerable bridges and other transportation infrastructure to be earthquake-ready. Loving this one. Do we have comments from commissioners?
That's good.
Wee-haw. Okay, next bullet. Balance transportation improvements with the county's goal to be carbon neutral by 2050 by working to improve regional air quality and mitigate impacts of vehicle pollution on public health and the environment. Commissioner Fisher, do you have a comment on this one?
No comment.
Okay, it's okay with you?
Yep.
Okay. Our last one. To support healthy and active communities, funding solutions should, one, mitigate impacts on local facilities caused by diversion, all modes. What does that mean? Because I have that highlighted here with a question mark.
Okay, happy to explain this. So as they're going through the NEPA process, they're going to identify all the impacts that are coming from tolling if it were to be applied. And they're going to have to mitigate some of those impacts. So say traffic potentially could divert off of 205 because people don't want to pay a toll. That'll put more traffic on the local systems, and that'll have a burden on those systems. So they may have to direct some revenue to mitigate those impacts. So what
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense now. That's what I thought diversion meant. But should we say, board, help me out here, caused by diverting transportation to other routes instead of diversion?
Mitigate impacts on local facilities caused by
Diverting,
traffic diversion.
yeah, traffic diversion to other routes. Does that, traffic? Yeah, like, who's up?
Commissioner Fisher has her hand
Fisher,
raised.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure what local facilities means. That's where I'm confused on this one.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
So even though the traffic's going to be on 205, if they hop off of 205, they're going to be impacting potentially local facilities because instead of being on the interstate where they're supposed to be, they're going to hop onto a county or a local road. And
Yeah,
that's
Stafford Road comes to mind, and they're doing it right now, right?
exactly. So they'll have to use
So,
some revenue.
Is that a facility? Is a road considered a facility?
Yes.
They say yes, Sonia.
Okay, well, I will defer to staff on that.
Yeah, well, I learned something new, too. This is great. Okay. Red light.
Commissioner Savas has his hand raised.
Savas, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting any change on this unless you all have some ideas about it, but I just want to say that some people will say, oh, the best way to mitigate impacts on local facilities caused by diversion is to do congestion pricing on local roads. Just want to give you that heads up.
Yeah, I know. Practically every statement can, yeah, you're right. So, is the word diversion okay? My question is, because I didn't, initially, I did not completely understand it. Dan Johnson, were you shaking your head clear in the back? Oh, okay, so, caused by diverting traffic to alternate routes. Caused by diverting traffic to alternate routes, does that work? There's a light on.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, I just want to add one thing that we ought to be aware of, and some of our staff know this, that ODOT uses two words interchangeably. It used to be diversion. Recently, ODOT's changed it to rerouting, I believe. Jamie, is that correct?
They use both, yes.
Rerouting. Oh, I like rerouting better than diversion.
So you might all want to just be prepared if you see a document and you see the word rerouting or diversion, that they're looked at interchangeably.
Yeah. And my goal in preparing this value statement is so that it can be understandable to anybody on the street picking it up, read it. That's why I wanted to more define diversion.
I
Yeah.
would say you put both descriptions in there, both words.
Okay, so do we want to say, how about caused by rerouting traffic, period, instead of diversion?
Paul's preference is leave it as it is, but instead, right after diversion, put slash or rerouting, so that
Okay.
both terms are used.
Okay, diversion, comma, rerouting traffic.
Right.
Staff, what do you think?
Could we say rerouting trips, potentially? Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's better.
the reason I put that forward for consideration is because there are multiple modes, right? So if there is something that is impacted that is not necessarily a vehicle, then that would also have to be mitigated.
That's
So it-
fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Rerouting trips, commissioners?
Good.
Okay. I see no lights on. The next bullet point, embed health and equity into project designs and program policies. Okay, somebody's really going to have to explain health
Yeah,
to me on this one.
I don't get it.
I don't get it either. I don't know that anybody else reading this is going to get it.
I'm hoping we still have Abe on the line.
Hey, Abe, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we'll explain this.
Yeah, I would just put this in two primary ways, looking at the safety impacts, kind of connected to that first bullet around rerouting traffic, if there's potential impacts to people walking and biking from increases in traffic off of the
Okay,
highway
we
or
need to
local
say
roads.
safety. Hey, Ab, we need to say safety and walking and biking
Embed safety into
Embed
project designs
safety.
and program policies.
and health.
Chair Smith,
Yes, Mark.
how about just embed safety into project designs and program policies?
Okay, I see a light on.
Commissioner Fisher has her hand raised.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go with a team from Clackamas County to a walkability institute from, put on by the Chronic, I can't remember, actually Abe would know who organized this, I can't remember this facility, I think it was the Institute of Chronic Disease. But lack of activity is one of the leading causes of death in our country. And so having a lens of, for everything that we do in design with an active lifestyle lens is really important. And the used to be on our list of lenses, that used to be a lens on our priorities. But in talking with Commissioner Savas over the years, it's been very clear that Clackamas County has had this lens and through all that it's done in its planning, but it doesn't hurt for us to include it in our value statement.
I would agree with that. I like that. Is that Commissioner Savas?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would retain the word health. It has a lot of broad meanings. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but.
I think,
Commissioner
yeah, we
Fisher-
can retain the word health. You're right. We'll add safety, and staff put walking and biking in there someplace to make it make sense. I think that's important.
Yeah, the word health has got to be in there.
It is. Health, safety, and then add walk and bike someplace, wherever you think it fits well.
Well, if I can just chime in, so I didn't raise my hand, but active, making sure it's just an active lifestyle, because people that don't walk or bike that might use devices, being out and active is
Okay.
very critical to health, so we just
Okay.
don't want to discriminate. However they want to word it, I'm good. We have amazing staff. And
We
I'm
do.
okay with just the word health too. I think that is.
Let's, if you want to put in active, you guys figure out the words.
So just for clarification purposes, please, what I'm hearing you request is that you would like this to now say, embed health and safety into project designs and program policies. And we could do something like we did with the bullet above, which is all modes, which kind of includes the walking, biking, other devices that.
Yeah,
Commissioner
active
Fisher was-
mobility, multi-mobility is another term I think they use. Whatever makes sense.
Yeah, you can't take the word equity out. You need to. you need
Yeah,
to
leave
keep
the word equity in.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the normal person, picking it up can read it. Last bullet point, improve connections and travel options to places of work, school, medical care, recreation.
Perfect.
Okay. I have visuals on that one, I like it. And then the concluding statement, this document is not an endorsement or acceptance of any proposal to implement tolling or congestion pricing on I-205. I like that
Can we
too.
put that in like font 50?
What do you say?
He said he's joking around about the font.
Oh, the font.
Can
You
we
want
put
the
that-
bigger
can we
font?
put that
How
in-
about bold it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could bold that. So let's go back up and make sure, I said I would revisit some things. On the second section, first bullet point, movement of commerce. Since we've gone through the document, I think that might be an important addition. Because it
And I
says,
think that goes in that second category, Chair, to support a vibrant economy. Got to be
yeah,
under that category somewhere.
yeah, it
And I
is.
don't know how our staff embed that, but, you know, if
Well-
staff can embed that big holistic movement of commerce as far as what our multimodal transportation system is supposed to do, I don't want that lost.
Yeah, well, I think it fits well here. On that first bullet point, the back of it says, economic disadvantages or unfair burdens on people, comma, communities, comma, businesses, and movement of commerce. I think that would work. Okay, they're shaking their heads. Let's see. Commissioner Schrader, have we addressed the rural community component to your satisfaction? Staff, can you help me, remind me where that is in here?
So we added it to that first section. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 bullets down.
Oh, there it is, urban and rural.
We added urban and rural, so in urban and rural areas with inadequate service.
Okay, Commissioner Schrader, go ahead.
It addresses my concerns.
What?
It's good work. It's good wording. It's fine.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so, staff, do you have any questions from us about anything that was added or subtracted today?
I do not. I think we have many listening ears, so I think as we refine the language here, I think we have what we need. My question for you is, do you need to see a final version of this document, or is this happening today?
I'll get to that right now. I
very
want to
much.
ask commissioners, do you have any final comments you'd like to make on this? Okay, so.
I just want to thank my colleagues for engaging in this. This is going to help me out.
Well,
Help
oh,
me
absolutely. I think
more.
this was a very productive session. Next time, I'd like to have you more present. It makes it easier on me to run everything and listen to what my colleagues have to say. There's a light on. Christina?
Commissioner Fisher has her hand
Commissioner
up?
Fisher, you're up.
Yeah, Chair Smith, I think you did a really great job in facilitating our conversation. And for me in particular, being here with all my multiple screens and being able to go back and forth between all the different materials is what I really needed to really learn and focus today.
Okay.
And that was very helpful to me because this is not second nature for me. I've really got to learn. And there's sometimes terms
Yeah.
that come up that I have no idea what they are. So being able to Google those and learn those and do that while we're doing it is really productive. My only thought, I would like to see this one more time. I almost want the statement at the bottom to be stronger about, for our residents in Clackamas County that don't have alternatives, I am really concerned that any tolling or congestion pricing is going to adversely affect our residents compared to others in the region. And I want to make that so loud and clear. And maybe there's a way to do that at the end. I still want to mull it and think about it and maybe spend some time with Commissioner Savas before we absolutely finalize this. But
Well,
it's a real concern.
I am, is there a time of the essence on this document? I mean, we're mid-April, And that's why I pushed up this policy session. I made this policy session a priority before everything else that this commission was discussing, so we could get this document out. So if anybody wants any changes on this, it needs to be done, my opinion, within the next hour or two, because I would like a final document sent out to commissioners. See, today's Wednesday, by this evening, and Gary, I would like it on the business agenda someplace tomorrow.
All right.
I see a light on.
Yes, I have Commissioner Schrader, then
Commissioner Schrader?
Chavez.
Yes, I'm actually fine with the document as it stands, with our changes. I just wanted to suggest that one of the issues we've also been dealing with in this county is lack of employment land. And we do not have a similar document that addresses what our policy should be and how we talk about that to the region. And MPAC, for example, has not been, in my mind, particularly vigorous in its with what they've been doing. It's mostly been informational, and we have pushed, and I have pushed for a very long time to really get a substantive conversation about employment land, what that means, and why we may have, I think, a lack of it.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't have to be done now.
Yeah. Well, Martha,
Because
why don't you talk to Gary? Why don't you talk that to Gary, and maybe we
Right.
can put that on the issues list. We can have a discussion at issues, what you want that to look like and what the goal is involved in that. Christine, another light on?
Commissioner Savas.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, Chair, just to address your, your statement about trying to get this done, I agree, we need to get this done, and it'd be nice to have this document to be used, and also to address Commissioner Fisher's point to strengthen that last statement, which I agree on. I got an idea, a quick and easy one.
Yeah.
I'll just read out what I'm saying here. So this document is not an endorsement or acceptance of any proposal to implement tolling or congestion pricing on I-205, as we believe it will have a disproportionately detrimental effect on Clackamas County residents.
That's good. I like that. Sonia, do you like that?
She was given a thumbs up.
She
Sorry, I
did.
was raising my thumb, but I realized you can't see my thumb.
I can now.
And just thank you, Paul. I really rely on you to fill in the blanks here, and that was great.
Yeah, well, I share my commissioner's comments saying that transportation is not my forte as well. So this has helped me a lot. The presentations have been very good, and I know it's complicated, and I know we will be moving forward. If you folks think this is complicated, wait until you hear the courthouse presentation. Now, that I understand, but it is complicated. So with that in mind, staff, do you have enough direction?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, we
let's
do.
get this out ASAP, and we'll review it and codify it at our business meeting. Gary, whatever procedure that is.
Yep. Add it to the
Thank you
agenda.
very much.
Sorry.
What?
May I please, I have one question and one clarification quickly before we close
What?
the meeting for the record. First of all, I'd like to clarify if you would like us to respond to questions in writing. You have a number of them from the presentation today, or if you would like us to come back for another policy session to respond to your questions.
Oh, well, yeah, whenever you get the answers, talk to Gary about how and when you want to present those answers.
Okay, thank you.
And those are in the making. We don't have to have those right away.
Thank you very much.
I want to
And
get this document out. That is my goal today, to get this document out, period.
Thank you. And my last clarification, I apologize. I just want to let you know, my colleagues have corrected me, and I want to make sure this is on the record today. There are many places in the United States where tolling applies to all lanes, traditional style of tolling. It is congestion pricing where there is nowhere in the United States where they toll all lanes.
I
So
think we need to further expand and learn those definitions. And that's something you can do when you bring back the answers for us.
Thank you, Chair.
Very good. Are we finally done? It is 11:31, and I'm going to say, everybody participating today did yeoman's work to get this done. My hat's off to staff. I think you were brilliant in bringing this document forward, and it would position Clackamas County as a leader moving forward on this issue. With that in mind, I believe our session is adjourned. Gary?
Yes, correct. Thank you.